Stop, don't move, or I swear you'll regret it. My father's voice thundered through the glittering ballroom, his hand gripping a crystal vase, eyes blazing with rage. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as the crowd's laughter dissolved into gasps. Blood trickled down my shoulder, warm against my skin, staining the polished floor of Portland's grandest hotel. The chandeliers above sparkled like cruel stars, mocking the chaos below. How did I end up here, betrayed by my own family, with cameras flashing and sirens closing in? My name is Emily Harper, and this is the night my world shattered, but also the night I found my strength. Growing up in the misty suburbs of Portland, Oregon, I was the invisible daughter in a family obsessed with perfection. My younger sister Grace was their shining star, her every smile a treasure. My parents Margaret and Thomas hoarded. Me, I was the shadow, the quiet one who loved sketching plants and dreaming of forests. At 10, I begged for a microscope for my birthday, my eyes wide with hope. Instead, Margaret handed me a makeup kit, her voice sharp. "You need to look prettier, Emily, like Grace." Thomas barely looked up from Grace's new ballet dress. His nod dismissing me, that moment burned into me, a wound that never quite healed. By 15, I won a statewide science fair, clutching my certificate with trembling hands. Margaret sighed. "That's nice, dear. But Grace's dance recital is this weekend. We're so proud of her." My achievements gathered dust while Grace's trophies gleamed on the mantel. Yet deep inside a fire grew a stubborn spark that whispered I was enough. I didn't need their love to prove my worth. I just needed myself. That spark carried me through the years, a quiet defiance against the weight of my family's neglect. I was Emily Harper, the girl who found solace in the green heart of Portland's forests, where the Douglas firs whispered secrets older than my pain. My childhood home in Beaverton was a stage for Grace's spotlight, but I learned to carve my own path in the shadows. Margaret, my mother, was a woman of sharp edges and sharper expectations, her eyes always searching for Grace's glow. Thomas, my father, was a distant storm cloud, his approval reserved for Grace's pirouettes and pageant smiles. I was just there, my dreams of science and nature dismissed as oddities. I remember my 12th birthday like it was yesterday. I'd spent weeks circling a botany book in a catalog, its pages promising answers to the mysteries of leaves and roots. When the day came, I tore open my gift heart, racing only to find a glittery hairbrush set. Margaret beamed. "Now you can fix that messy hair, Emily. Be more like Grace." Grace, twirling in her new velvet skirt, giggled as Thomas clapped his rare smile, lighting up the room for her. My throat tightened, but I swallowed the hurt, tucking the book's image into my mind like a seed waiting for soil. School became my refuge. While Grace charmed her way through dance classes, I buried myself in biology, memorizing plant cycles and sketching ecosystems in my worn notebook. At 16, I entered a regional science competition, spending nights in our garage rigging a model of sustainable irrigation. When I won first place, the judges' praise felt like sunlight after years of shade. I rushed home, certificate in hand, hoping for once they'd see me. Thomas glanced up from Grace's latest pageant photos. "Good job, kid. Did you hear Grace won Miss Junior Portland?" Margaret didn't even look up. My heart sank, but that spark flared brighter. I didn't need their eyes on me. I'd build a life they couldn't ignore. High school ended, and I clawed my way into the University of Oregon on a full scholarship, leaving Beaverton's suffocating air behind. College was a revelation. In lecture halls and labs, My love for ecology wasn't weird, it was celebrated. Professors praised my research on forest conservation, and for the first time, I felt seen. I worked late nights balancing classes with a barista job, saving every penny for a future I could call mine. Grace visited once, her designer purse clashing with my dorm's thrift store vibe. She laughed. "Why do you work so hard?" Just enjoy life." I smiled tightly, knowing she'd never understand the hunger driving me. By 24, I graduated top of my class, landing a job at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute in Portland. My salary wasn't lavish, but it was enough to dream of a home where I could plant roots of my own. I lived frugally, skipping concerts and vacations, funneling every bonus into savings. At 30, after years of sacrifice, I bought a $500,000 bungalow in Laurelhurst, a quiet neighborhood where maples lined the streets. The house was modest but perfect, a cozy study for my books, a kitchen with sunlight spilling in, and a backyard where I envisioned a garden of native plants. Standing in the empty living room, keys in hand, I felt a rush of pride. This was mine, built by my hands alone. I called Margaret to share the news, hoping for a flicker of warmth. Her voice was flat. "That's nice, Emily. Why didn't you get something downtown?" "Grace's new modeling contract is the talk of the town," Thomas muttered in the background. "A house that big for one person seems wasteful." Their words stung, but I brushed them off. My house wasn't for them. It was for me, the girl who'd once been invisible, now standing tall. Grace's life, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of flashbulbs and applause. At 28, she was engaged to Nathan Brooks, a soft-spoken software engineer with kind eyes. Margaret threw herself into planning the engagement party, transforming it into a spectacle at the Sentinel Hotel downtown. I didn't want to go, but duty tugged at me. Family, after all, was a knot I couldn't fully untie. I spent days painting a canvas of the Columbia River Gorge, a place I'd fought to protect in my work as a gift for Grace. It wasn't flashy, but it was personal, a piece of my heart offered quietly. When I gave it to her, Margaret raised an eyebrow. "A painting? How unique." Grace smiled politely, then turned to greet her guests. I slipped to the edge of the room, clutching my glass, the familiar ache settling in. But something else stirred too, a sense that this night would change everything. The Sentinel Hotel's ballroom glittered like a jewel, its chandeliers casting golden light across tables draped in ivory silk. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, but I stood near the bar, my fingers tracing the rim of a sparkling water. Grace floated through the crowd, her cream-colored dress shimmering, every eye drawn to her like moths to a flame. Nathan, her fiancé, hovered nearby, his shy smile softening the room's grandeur. I watched them, a bittersweet pang in my chest. This was Grace's world, polished, perfect, adored. Mine was quieter, rooted in the soil of forests I fought to save. But tonight, I was here for her. My work at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute had become my lifeline. Last month, I'd led a project to protect a stretch of old-growth forest near Mount Hood, threatened by a developer's bulldozers. Nights blurred into mornings as I pored over data-drafted proposals and faced a skeptical city council. When we secured a $2 million grant to preserve the land, my team cheered and I felt a rush of purpose. This was my mark, my way of mattering. I texted Margaret a photo of the forest, hoping she'd care. Her reply was a single line: "Grace's engagement party is Saturday. Don't be late." Thomas didn't respond at all. I stared at my phone, the familiar ache blooming, but pushed it down. Their silence couldn't dim what I'd built. The party buzzed with Portland's elite photographers, snapping Grace's every move, guests fawning over her modeling portfolio. I wore a simple green dress, my only nod to the occasion, blending into the background as always. Nathan caught my eye and waved, breaking away from Grace to approach. "Your painting was beautiful, Emily," he said, his voice warm. "That forest means a lot to you, doesn't it?" I nodded, surprised he'd noticed. "It's my heart," I admitted. He smiled, something genuine in his eyes. "I wish Grace had your fire." His words hung there unexpected, and for a moment I felt seen. But then Margaret's voice cut through, calling him back to Grace's side. I drifted to a corner, watching the room spin around Grace's orbit. My mind wandered to my bungalow in Laurelhurst, its garden now sprouting ferns and wildflowers. That house was my sanctuary, bought with years of skipped vacations and overtime shifts. At 32, I'd done what my parents never thought possible, built a life without their applause. Yet standing here, I couldn't shake the weight of their indifference. Why did I still hope for their pride? The question gnawed at me unanswered. Margaret appeared suddenly, her perfume sharp, her smile too wide. "Emily, dear, we need a word." Thomas loomed behind her, his face unreadable, hands clasped like a judge. My stomach nodded, but I followed them to a quiet alcove where the music faded to a hum. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. Margaret leaned in, her voice syrupy but edged. "Grace's engagement is a big moment, Emily. We want it to be perfect." I nodded, wary. "Of course. What's this about?" Thomas cleared his throat, his eyes cold. "Your house in Laurelhurst. It's too much for one person. Grace and Nathan need a real home to start their life." The words hit like a slap. I blinked, my breath catching. "You're asking me to give them my house?" Margaret's smile tightened. "It's the right thing, Emily. Family sacrifices for family. Grace deserves this." My hands curled into fists, nails biting my palms. That house wasn't just walls and windows. It was every late night, every skipped dream, every moment I proved I was enough. "No," I said, my voice steady but low. "I worked for that house. It's mine." Thomas's jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a growl. "You're selfish, Emily. Always have been. Grace is the future of this family, not you." My heart pounded, a fire rising in my chest. "I'm not giving up my home," I said louder now. "Not for Grace, not for anyone." Margaret's eyes flashed, her sweetness gone. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed. "After all we've done, you'd ruin Grace's happiness." I stepped back, shaking my head. "You don't get to decide what I owe." The alcove seemed to shrink, their anger pressing against me. Guests nearby glanced over, sensing the tension. Nathan was across the room, laughing with Grace, oblivious. I turned to leave, but Thomas grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You will do this, Emily," he snarled, "or you'll regret it." I yanked free, my pulse racing, and walked back to the ballroom, the lights too bright, the music too loud. Something dark was brewing, a storm I couldn't yet see. I sipped my drink, trying to steady myself, but Margaret's whisper followed me like a ghost. "Family sacrifices for family." Her words echoed, twisting the knife of years spent unseen. I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting for the girl who'd been told she'd never be enough. And I wouldn't let them take that from me. Not tonight, not ever. The ballroom pulsed with energy, a kaleidoscope of laughter and clinking champagne flutes. But my heart thundered louder than the music. I stood near the edge of the Sentinel Hotel's grand hall, my green dress catching the light, my mind replaying Thomas's threat. "You'll regret it." His words coiled around me, venomous as I scanned the room. Grace twirled in Nathan's arms, her cream dress a beacon of joy, while Margaret's forced smile tracked me from across the floor. The air felt thick like a storm about to break. I clutched my glass, the cold rim grounding me. My house in Laurelhurst wasn't just a building. It was my defiance, my proof that I didn't need their love to thrive. Yet here they were, demanding I hand it over as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. I took a shaky breath, trying to push their voices out. "Focus, Emily. This is Grace's night." But the unease wouldn't lift. Margaret's eyes met mine, sharp and calculating, and I knew this wasn't over. The music softened, and a spotlight bathed Grace and Nathan as they stepped onto the dance floor. Guests clapped, phones flashing, capturing their perfect moment. I forced a smile, blending into the crowd, but Margaret appeared at my side, her hand grazing my elbow. "Emily, we're not done," she whispered, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "Come with me, now." Thomas was already moving toward a side door, his broad shoulders stiff with purpose. My stomach twisted, but I followed the weight of their expectation, pulling me like a tide. We slipped into a dimly lit corridor, the hum of the party fading behind us. The walls were lined with gilded mirrors, reflecting my tense face back at me. Thomas turned his eyes hard as flint. "We've given you everything, Emily," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you repay us by hoarding that house while Grace builds a future." Margaret nodded, her lips tight. "It's simple. Give them the house as an engagement gift. It's what families do." My breath caught rage sparking in my chest. "That house is mine," I said, my voice rising. "I worked nights, skipped dreams, built it with my own hands. Grace doesn't get to take it because you love her more." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "How dare you speak to us like that? You've always been selfish, Emily. Always." Thomas stepped closer, his shadow looming. "You will sign over that house, or I'll make sure you understand family duty." I shook my head, stepping back. "No, I'm done being your shadow." I turned to leave, my heart pounding, but Thomas's hand shot out, seizing a crystal vase from a nearby table. Its flowers spilled to the floor, petals crushed under his shoes. "You ungrateful brat!" he roared, and before I could react, he hurled the vase. It struck my shoulder with a sickening crack, shards exploding across the corridor. Pain seared through me, hot and sharp, as blood soaked my dress, dripping onto the marble floor. I stumbled, clutching my arm, my vision blurring. Screams erupted from the ballroom. Guests poured into the corridor. Phones raised, recording the chaos. Margaret lunged forward, her face twisted with fury. "You ruined everything," she spat. "This was Grace's night, and you made it about you." I staggered, blood warm against my fingers, the world spinning. Nathan pushed through the crowd, his face pale with horror. "Emily," he shouted, kneeling beside me. "Stay with me." He glared at Margaret. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Thomas stood frozen, the vase's stem still in his hand, his rage melting into shock. Grace appeared, her dress glowing in the dim light, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, Dad, what did you do?" Her voice broke a crack in her perfect facade. I looked at her, pain pulsing through me, and whispered, "They wanted my house. For you." Grace's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling. "Emily, I didn't know." But her words felt hollow, drowned by years of her silence. Lila Carter, my best friend and a lawyer, shoved her way forward, her phone already dialing. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice steel. "Nobody move." She crouched beside me, pressing a napkin to my wound. "You're okay, Em. I've got you." Guests murmured, some filming, others whispering in disgust. Nathan stood shielding me from Margaret's glare. "This ends now," he said, his quiet demeanor gone, replaced by a fierce edge. "You don't touch her again." Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flashing through the hotel's glass doors. Paramedics rushed in, their hands gentle as they eased me onto a stretcher. Blood stained my dress, my shoulder throbbing. But the deeper pain was in my heart, Margaret's venom. Thomas's violence, Grace's tears, they were a mirror of my life, reflecting every moment I'd been unseen. As the medics carried me out, I caught Grace's eye. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," but I turned away. Sorry wasn't enough. Not anymore. The corridor faded, the crowd's voices blending into a dull roar. Nathan followed the stretcher, his hand brushing mine. "You're stronger than they know," he whispered. I clung to his words, a lifeline in the chaos. The night that was meant to celebrate love had shattered into betrayal. But as the ambulance doors closed, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just the end of a party. It was the beginning of my fight for justice, for myself, for the life I'd built from ashes. The ambulance sped through Portland's rain-slicked streets, its siren a wail that matched the ache in my chest. My shoulder throbbed under the paramedics' bandages, the gash from the crystal vase, a pulsing reminder of Thomas's rage. Blood crusted my dress, but the real wound was deeper, carved by years of being less than Grace in my parents' eyes. I lay on the stretcher, staring at the ceiling, Nathan's words echoing, "You're stronger than they know." I wanted to believe him, but as the city lights blurred past, all I felt was the weight of betrayal. At the hospital, the fluorescent buzz and antiseptic smell grounded me. Nurses stitched my wound, their voices soft but urgent. "Concussion risk," they murmured. "No fractures, thank God." They wrapped my shoulder, the gauze tight against my skin. I drifted in and out, the pain dulled by medication, but my mind replayed the corridor. Thomas's snarl, Margaret's venom, Grace's tear-streaked face. How had it come to this? My family, the people meant to love me, had shattered me in front of a crowd. Yet in that shattering, I saw a truth. I didn't owe them my silence anymore. Nathan stayed by my side, his presence a quiet anchor. He sat in the plastic chair, his suit, rumpled eyes heavy with worry. "You don't have to go through this alone, Emily," he said, his voice low. "Lila's already gathering witnesses. We'll make them pay." I knotted my throat tight. Lila Carter, my best friend and a bulldog of a lawyer, had been a force at the hotel, collecting videos and statements, while the police cuffed Thomas and Margaret. The thought of facing my parents in court twisted my stomach, but Nathan's hand on mine steadied me. For once, I wasn't invisible. Back at the Sentinel, the engagement party had collapsed into chaos. Guests left in droves, their whispers sharp with outrage. Nathan's parents, the Brookses, confronted Grace, their voices cold. "We trusted your family." Mrs. Brooks said, her arms crossed. "But this violence, this cruelty, it's unforgivable. We won't tie our son to this." Grace, still in her cream dress, crumpled into a chair, sobbing as the fairy tale night dissolved. Nathan didn't comfort her. His eyes, once soft for her, were hard with disappointment. He'd seen the truth of her family, my family, and chosen to stand with me. Lila arrived at the hospital the next morning, her laptop brimming with evidence. "We've got multiple videos, Em," she said, her voice fierce. "Clear shots of Thomas throwing the vase, Margaret screaming at you, plus 10 witnesses, including Nathan, ready to testify. This isn't just assault, it's emotional abuse, coercion, the works. We're filing charges." I stared at her, the weight of it sinking in. Suing my parents felt like severing a cord, but that cord had been strangling me for years. "Do it," I said, my voice firm. "I want justice." The case moved fast. By week's end, I was discharged, my shoulder stiff but healing. Lila's office in downtown Portland became our war room, its oak shelves lined with legal books, a stark contrast to the chaos we were unraveling. She slid a thick file across her desk. "Affidavits, medical reports, and those damning videos. You've got a rock-solid case," she said. Nathan sat beside me, his presence a reminder I wasn't fighting alone. I signed the papers, my hand steady. This wasn't just for me. It was for the girl who'd been told she was never enough. The trial at Multnomah County Courthouse drew a crowd, reporters, curious locals, even distant cousins who'd heard the scandal. Thomas and Margaret sat at the defendant's table, their faces, pale eyes darting. I took the stand, my heart hammering, and told my story. The years of neglect, the favoritism that crowned Grace, while I faded the night they demanded my home and answered my refusal with violence. Lila played the videos, the footage brutal in its clarity. Thomas's arm, swinging the vase, shattering, my blood pooling. Margaret's screams. "You ruined everything," echoed through the silent courtroom. Witnesses followed. Nathan recounted the corridor, his voice steady but thick with anger. "I saw Thomas attack her," he said. Margaret egged him on. Lila called guests who'd seen decades of favoritism, their stories painting a picture of a family where one daughter shone and the other was erased. Thomas's lawyer argued it was a heat-of-the-moment act, a father pushed too far. But the videos didn't lie. The jury's faces were grim, their verdict swift. "We find the defendants, Thomas Harper and Margaret Harper, guilty of assault, emotional abuse, and attempted coercion," the foreman said. A gasp rippled through the room. Margaret clutched the table, her face crumpling. Thomas stared ahead, jaw tight, as if he could will the truth away. Judge Larson, a woman with steel-gray hair, delivered the sentence. 7 years in state prison for each, no parole for 5. Full restitution for medical costs, legal fees, and emotional damages. The gavel fell like a thunderclap, sealing their fate. I exhaled a breath I'd held for years. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it lifted a weight I'd carried too long. As bailiffs led Thomas and Margaret away, their handcuffs glinting, I felt no joy, only closure. They'd built a world where Grace was everything, and I was nothing. Now that world lay in ruins, and I was still standing. Grace came to me later, outside the courthouse, her eyes red. "Emily, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't see how bad it was. I should have spoken up." Her voice broke, and for the first time I saw her not as the golden child, but as someone trapped in their story too. "I don't hate you, Grace," I said, my voice soft but firm, "but I need to live for me now." She nodded, tears falling, and walked away. Her silhouette fading into the rain. She'd leave Portland soon, searching for her own path, and I wished her well, but from a distance. Nathan waited for me, his smile a quiet promise. "You did it," he said, pride in his eyes. "You fought for yourself." I leaned into him, the courthouse steps cold beneath us. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was free. The scars on my shoulder, in my heart, would fade, but they'd always remind me of this moment when I chose myself and the world finally saw me. The Portland sky was a soft gray, the kind that promised renewal after a storm. I stood in the heart of Forest Park, the towering firs stretching toward the clouds, their whispers blending with the rustle of leaves. My shoulder still ached a faint echo of the Vase's blow, but the deeper wounds, the ones carved by years of neglect, were beginning to heal. Nathan stood beside me, his hand warm in mine. His quiet strength, a tether to a future I'd never dared imagine. My bungalow in Laurelhurst waited for us, its garden now bursting with wildflowers, each bloom a testament to what I'd built. This was my life, hard-won and wholly mine. Months had passed since the trial, and the echoes of that night at the Sentinel Hotel had faded, replaced by a new rhythm. I threw myself back into my work at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute, my passion for conservation burning brighter than ever. The forest near Mount Hood, the one I'd fought to save, was now a protected sanctuary, its trails open to hikers who'd never know the battles I'd waged. I found peace there, sketching plants in my notebook, each line a quiet victory. My parents, Thomas and Margaret, were shadows now, their prison sentences a distant hum. I didn't visit, didn't write. Their absence was a gift, freeing me to breathe. Grace had left Portland, chasing a fresh start in Seattle. She sent me a letter, once her words shaky, but sincere. I'm learning to be more than their daughter, Emily. I hope you're happy. I tucked it away, not ready to reply, but glad she was trying. Her departure closed a chapter 1 I'd long outgrown. The pain of her favored place in our family lingered, but it no longer defined me. I was Emily Harper, not the invisible sister, but a woman who'd carved her own light. Nathan became my anchor, his kindness a steady current pulling me forward. One evening he led me to the Mount Hood forest, the air crisp with pine. Under a canopy of stars, he knelt, a wooden ring carved with a delicate fern leaf gleaming in his hand. Emily Harper. He said, his voice thick, I don't want a perfect life. I want a real one with you. Will you marry me? Tears blurred my vision, joy swelling like a tide. Yes, I laughed, pulling him up our embrace, sealing a promise. The ring felt like an extension of me, simple, rooted, true. Our wedding was small, held in Forest Park's wildflower meadow with Lila Carter as my maid of honor. Her fierce grin lighting the day. No chandeliers, no crowds, just friends who saw me, truly saw me. I wore a flowing dress, the color of sage. My hair loose, a crown of daisies woven by Lila. Nathan's vows were quiet but fierce. You're my home, Emily, wherever we go. I vowed to love him, to build a life where we both could grow. As we kissed, the wind carried our laughter, and I felt it. I wasn't just living. I was alive. We moved into the Laurelhurst bungalow, now our home. I planted a garden of native plants, lupines, columbines, ferns, each one a marker of resilience. At night, we'd sit on the porch planning a future that felt boundless. I launched a nonprofit green haven to support kids sidelined by their families, offering scholarships for science programs. Every letter from a grateful teen reminded me why I'd fought, not just for me, but for anyone told they weren't enough. Looking back, I learned lessons that reshaped me, ones I carry like seeds to plant in others. First, your worth doesn't need anyone's approval. I spent years chasing my parents' pride, but true value comes from within. In America, where success is king, it's easy to feel less than. But your dreams, your work, your heart, they're enough. Second, standing up to injustice is never easy, but it's necessary. Suing my parents felt like breaking a taboo, but it freed me. If you're trapped in a toxic family, find allies, friends, lawyers, therapists, and fight for your peace. Third, love, real love heals. Nathan and Lila showed me family isn't blood. It's the people who stand by you when the world cracks open. Build your tribe and let them lift you. If you're listening, know this life isn't fair, but it's yours to shape. Start small. Save $1, chase a dream, speak your truth. My garden grows because I tended it even when my hands shook. You can tend yours too. I'm Emily Harper, and my scars tell a story not of pain, but of strength of roots that held fast through the storm. This house, this life, this love, they're mine. And whatever you're building, it's yours. Keep going. The world is waiting to see you bloom.